Good morning and welcome to this morning meditation. This morning we are going to reflect on the theme, O God, stay with us. O God, stay with us. And the verse for our meditation this morning is from Luke chapter 24, verse 29. But they urged him, strongly saying, stay with us, for it is toward evening and the day is now fast spent. This verse is a part of the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus to the disciples on the road to Emmaus. The episode of Jesus' disciples walking to the Emmaus was something very astonishing to listen and to understand, a message for our life as a Christian believer. As this episode begins, when these two disciples were walking towards the Emmaus, the first and foremost thing that we see as the act of Jesus at this episode was that in verse 15 it says, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. And one of the contemporary translations of this text says that it was Jesus who went near them and joined their journey. It's very obvious that these two disciples were discussing about the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. As they were conversing and moving towards the Emmaus, it was Jesus who came near to them, who joined their conversation as well as their journey towards Emmaus. Most of the times in our life realities, we may also think in times of distress and struggles, we think that it's I myself alone who is journeying in this life. And the reality is something different. God volunteers and God himself comes near and joins our conversation. It is very important for us to understand that I am not journeying alone in this life, but I have a God who is a sojourner and who is also a co-traveler in my life. However, the disciples did not realize Jesus Christ in the first place. They were just conversing, and the conversation has developed, and Jesus trying to explain the prophets and all the things that were foretold about the death and passion of Christ to them on their walk to Emmaus. And there comes the time to have a separation in the journey. In the point of separation, in the time where their journey came at the crossroads, now Jesus and these two disciples had to make a decision. And what happens here in verse 28, it says Jesus acted as if he were going far away from them. So when they had to encounter the crossroads where these disciples had to go on one side, and Jesus is acting here that he is pretending as if he is going away from them. Obviously, he's taking the alternative route. At this context, these disciples made an invitation to Christ where they called them, "Oh God, stay with us. Oh God, stay with us." And this is something very unique for us to understand. Are we ready to make this invitation to Christ in our life? Of course, Christ is journeying with us. Christ is conversing with us. However, when we are in crossroads, are we ready to make this prayer an earnest invitation to Christ? God, stay with us. And we listen to this hymn, Abide with Me, one of the beautiful phrases in the entire New Testament, where the gospel writer or the evangelist John also uses this term that we should abide in Christ. The Greek expressions for this term, meno and Christos, abiding in Christ, is one of the best thing that one believer can do in his or her life. We choose to abide in Christ. And what happened when Jesus stayed with them? They made the invitation and Jesus went with them. Jesus stayed with them and Jesus had a supper with them. And what is the result of that? When you read from verses 31, the first and foremost thing that we see there, their eyes were opened. If you remain in Christ and if you abide in Christ and if you ask God to abide in you, the first blessing that you receive in your life is that your eyes will be open. Opened eyes. That's what we see. And the second thing is that the way in the same verse, in verse 31, we read, they recognized him. Till then, they could not recognize with whom they are speaking. In other words, you can experience God's revelation in your life. You can understand God's manifestation in your life. That's what very precisely said here. So first I said, the blessing, when you stay with Christ, you will have an opened eyes and a recognized life or a recognized heart, the heart that experiences the revelation of Christ in our life. And then the third thing, one of the very astonishing thing to see in our life is that in verse 33, and they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. The legs that was the legs that were ready to return at the same time. They committed legs to walk for the sake of Christ. You know, until then they were asking Jesus to stay with us because it is already late. You can't make the journey ahead. But now, when their eyes were opened, when they recognized Jesus in their life, when they understood God's revelation in their life, they could not confine themselves. The very same disciples who said to Jesus, it is not so safe to travel at this late hour, they decided to take that risk. And without any delay, at the very moment, they rose and they traveled back to Jerusalem just to propagate this news of Jesus' resurrection to the people, those who are waiting, mourning, and crying back in Jerusalem. Where is our life? Where you are? Are you ready to make an invitation to Christ in this morning? God, you stay with us. When you say that, your eyes will be opened. You will understand the revelation of Christ in your life. At the same time, you will have a committed legs to walk for the sake of Christ, like the disciples on the road to Emmaus took up the journey back. We always talk about the journey forward to Emmaus, but when you think about the journey back to Jerusalem at the very same hour, it is something very interesting to know, and it is something that we have to take in our hearts. May God bless us to take this radical commitment in our life, and let's call God to stay with us. Amen.